You ever notice that feeling when someone walks into a room and, for a moment, everything just slows down? It's not because they're making a big entrance or trying to steal the spotlight. There's just something about the way they carry themselves, like they've survived storms nobody else even saw, like every worn-down step beneath their feet is there because they earned it, the hard way. That's Denzel Washington. Always has been. For over 40 years, he's been one of the most respected people, not just in the world of movies, but honestly, anywhere. In an industry where ego runs rampant and headlines get messy, Denzel hasn't shifted. He moves with a steady, measured purpose. It's discipline, but it's more than that. It's faith. It's restraint. It's a kind of old-school dignity you barely see anymore. People look up to him for all of that. Not just for the way he owns every scene, but for the way he seems completely unshakable, even when the world around him isn't. But here's something I keep thinking about, and I want you to think about it too. Everyone praises his poise and his iron will, but what does a life built on that kind of self-control really cost? What does it take to keep carrying yourself that way year after year? What follows you home after the standing ovations die down? After they pack up the lights, after the awards sit silent on the mantle? Let's be honest, discipline doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's a shield. Sometimes it's a habit you build to keep pain tucked away, to cope with memories you can't or won't talk about. That's the side of strength nobody likes to mention. We never see it in acceptance speeches, never talk about it when the world insists you're one of the lucky ones. That's what I want to talk about right now, the weight you never see, the cost of holding it all together, especially when everyone thinks you're invincible, the heaviness people never mention, even as it quietly shapes every move. So, if you're in, settle for a bit. Grab your coffee, your tea, whatever you like, because the story I'm about to share isn't the one you'll find on Wikipedia or in glossy profiles. It's the real story, and almost nobody hears it. Denzel Washington entered the world on December 28, 1954, in Mount Vernon, New York, a working-class slice of America where faith and hardship were neighbors, sometimes living under the same roof, sometimes falling from the same tongue in the same breath. On the surface, his childhood had structure. His father, Reverend Denzel Washington Sr., doubled up as a Pentecostal minister and a city worker, keeping the family clock ticking with prayer and strict routines. His mother, Lennis, hustled day in and day out, running a tiny beauty salon, raising 3 kids on her own fire and grit. She was relentless, the sort of woman you almost miss if you try to describe her, because she never stood still long enough to fit into neat words. Anyone looking in from the outside might have called it a safe place to grow up, and sure, some days it was, but rituals don't always replace connection. Inside those walls, something subtle but important was missing. The rules were clear, but the warmth was rationed. Denzel Sr. believed in structure and scripture, in discipline and authority. Hugs didn't happen that often. I love yous didn't echo through the halls. In their place, there were rules, always rules. Then came 1968. Denzel was only 14 when his parents split. His father didn't leave in a blaze of anger or in some dramatic scene. He just slipped into the background. A quieter kind of loss, hard to pinpoint or put into words, but somehow more difficult to carry than a fight would have been. There weren't lingering hugs to miss, or heart-to-hearts calling him back, just a quiet hole, where connection never quite happened. That's the kind of wound that lingers. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself, but it follows you, seeps into your bones, shapes how you move through the world. Over time, it made Denzel cautious, careful with feelings, the sort of man who would rather stand upright inside silence than risk showing where it really hurts. So by the time Hollywood started testing him, Denzel already knew what it was like to keep everything locked up. He didn't need to learn resilience in front of the cameras. Real life had already handled that job. By his teenage years, that emptiness, his father's absence, acted like gravity. Mount Vernon in the late 60s wasn't exactly a soft landing for young guys without a lighthouse. If you didn't have a plan, the streets had one ready for you. Instant belonging, quick thrills, choices you'd pay for way down the line. Years went by, and Denzel watched some friends disappear behind bars, lost to the kind of mistakes that don't give second chances. He's spoken openly about it. The guys I grew up with did 40 years combined. They went one way, I went another. He makes it sound simple, but it wasn't luck. His mother, always keeping an eye on him, saw where he was headed even before he did. She saw the temper, the way his eyes drifted, the way he seemed drawn to the wrong kind of trouble. So she stepped in, not with a gentle explanation or a soft touch. She acted. She sent him away to Oakland Military Academy. For a 14-year-old kid, that move stung like a slap. The first nights were harsh. You can imagine it. Cold beds, boots on freezing floors, strangers barking commands. Nobody knew or cared about his struggles. Routine replaced comfort. Every day testing whether he'd break. But here's the twist. The discipline that once felt suffocating slowly turned into something steady. The rigid rules forced out the chaos. Consequences were real, immediate, inescapable. And for the first time, he felt a kind of balance. Hard-won, but real. Much later, Denzel said his mother saved his life, not with hugs or talks or reassurances, but through action. He didn't always see it then. He definitely felt abandoned. But it was the right move, the kind of tough decision that changed everything. Let me ask you, has anyone ever stepped in, made a choice for you that at the time felt like punishment, but later turned out to be real love in action? Think about it. Maybe share it if you want. I bet more people have stories like that than we realize. Life's weird that way. The toughest moments sometimes turn out to be the ones we need most. When Denzel left the military academy, it wasn't some clean break. You step out of uniform, and suddenly life slots into place. It almost never works that way. He landed at Fordham in New York feeling disciplined, sure, but lost, trying to figure out who he was or who he could become. He hardly had money. The New York winters felt brutal, biting right through the thin walls and thinner wallets. Some nights, he went to bed without a real meal. He picked up any job that offered a paycheck, cleaning, hauling, serving customers, usually just doing whatever needed to get done, with no room for pride. Back home, his mom's salon scraped by. There was no safety net waiting for him, so every decision was about survival, not some vision of the future. At that point, Denzel wasn't dreaming about acting. He wasn't even dreaming in the way people expect young adults to dream. He was just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to hold on to the basics. Then, that summer of 1975, something tiny but seismic happened. Working as a counselor at a YMCA camp, he saw a talent show unravel. The performer suddenly bailed. No script, no plan, just reflex. Denzel volunteered himself. It was pure impulse. The room changed as soon as he took the stage. Kids leaned in. Laughter bounced around the walls, and at the end, a woman locked eyes and spoke right at him. "You were born to act." It wasn't just the compliment. Honestly, it was like she named a piece of him he didn't know was missing. Recognition, not just approval. Something clicked in him. He returned to Fordham, shifted his major to drama, and felt, for the first time, that he wasn't just working hard, he was actually working towards something real. He graduated in 1977, tougher, leaner, more awake. Sure, he had no idea how hard the path ahead would be, but at least he finally knew where he wanted it to go. The road jerked forward, and yeah, it was harsh. Graduation didn't mean safety, it meant new risks. A scholarship sent him west to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, but promise came wrapped in daily struggle. His room was sparse, cold, the kind of place you go to sleep and hope morning arrives quickly. He survived on bread and tap water. He practiced lines alone, under dim light, repeating them so he could find that steady place inside himself. But then he'd step on stage. Suddenly the cold hunger, everything fell away. He felt locked in, fully present, alive in the deepest sense. After a year, he went back to New York, carrying little more than a suitcase and a battered Bible. He wasn't bringing guarantees with him, just a willingness to keep fighting. What followed was a string of failed auditions. Every casting room ended the same way. "We'll call you." Nobody did. He waited in endless rooms, drank bad coffee, slept on borrowed couches, borrowed floors, sometimes just anywhere he could crash. He never called himself homeless, but he knew how it felt to belong nowhere. Every no felt crushing. Yet he kept showing up. That stubbornness, honestly, is rare. Most people go, "All right, the message is obvious." They retreat. Denzel treated it as a challenge. Was he really willing to pay the price others wouldn't? Eventually, he started snagging small roles in the early 80s. None of them were flashy, but every part mattered to him. He saw them as proof. Not to be seen exactly, but to be honest. He wanted to be truthful more than anything else. Then he got offered a bigger role. Finally, some doors opened. The movie industry started to notice him, and the parts started promising momentum. The script, though, demanded a compromise. It twisted dignity for entertainment. Denzel paused. Instead of jumping in, he talked to Sidney Poitier, someone who understood exactly where he was standing. The advice was short and heavy. Your early choices will tell the world who you are. Denzel walked away from the role. Turning it down slowed his rise. Some people stopped calling. Jobs dried up. That lost opportunity wasn't just theoretical. It made life harder in real ways. But he kept something more important than money or fame. He stayed aligned with himself. Principle over shortcuts. Faith rather than fear. Identity over opportunity. Years later, he admitted that turning down that job cost him work, but it saved him too. When success finally arrived, with Glory, Malcolm X, and other roles that changed the shape of film, he felt he'd earned it. He hadn't taken shortcuts. He hadn't traded his values for a break, and you could see it. Denzel never bent to Hollywood's expectations. Instead, Hollywood had to bend toward him. This whole journey, it's gritty, not glamorous. It's about sacrifice, stubbornness, and a refusal to compromise who you are just to get ahead. That's what gives his story power. That's why it resonates decades later, when most people barely remember the names on last year's marquee. Let's get real for a second. Nobody really tells you what life looks like at the very top. The stuff you don't see when someone like Denzel Washington turns into one of Hollywood's legends. It's easy to think it's all certainty and power, trophies and respect, a man who doesn't seem to flinch ever. But under all that, there's something heavier. The world sees him as unshakable, but they miss the fact that, up there, you're never allowed to slip. Every mistake gets stamped in memory. For someone whose whole reputation rests on discipline and honesty, staying flawless starts to feel like a different kind of prison. On set, he's working 16-hour days, then prep stretches well into the night. Scripts trail him home, sleep is scarce, rest comes with conditions. The higher his star climbs, the less room he has to show weakness. Nobody's cutting him slack anymore. There's a kind of isolation that settles in, but it's quiet, not dramatic, not easy to spot. It's a certain loneliness that sneaks into hotel rooms after midnight or catches him off guard in the silence of a trailer. Everyone admires him, sure, but not many actually know him. Success brings crowds, expectations, people who depend on you. He carries it all quietly, never letting on that he's tired or uncertain. Have you ever been the one everyone turns to for support, but you couldn't lean on anyone yourself? That feeling doesn't get talked about enough. It sits heavy, and I think it's one of the rawest, loneliest experiences you can have. Denzel said it again and again. Fame isn't the enemy. Distraction is. He keeps coming back to the basics. Faith, routine, purpose. Reminding himself why he started, and more importantly, the kind of person he promised himself he would never become. Greatness comes at a price, and it's not paid in checks or awards. It's paid in hours you can never get back, in quiet moments nobody sees, and in the discipline to stay grounded while everything around you pulls you toward more excess, more attention. Let's talk about marriage, because honestly, in Hollywood, that hardly ever seems to survive. Denzel and Pauletta Pearson? That story's almost invisible compared to the usual headline drama, but it's worth pausing for. He met her in 1977, long before anyone knew his name. He was struggling, unsure, basically a nobody. She was steady, rooted in music, faith, and a kind of sharpness that didn't care about fame. Their relationship didn't start with fireworks. It started with real conversations, with two people sharing values and trying to make it through. They got married in 1983. Things were tight, The future was fuzzy, and those early years were marked by tiny apartments, late rent, hope held together with prayer. There was a piano in the corner, scripts scattered across the kitchen table. It wasn't comfortable, but it had a rhythm. Then Denzel's career took off, and he was gone for months, working crazy hours. Applause replaced being present. Back home, Pauletta held the family together. She created structure, raised the kids, kept the faith. Denzel has always said it honestly. He worked, she raised the family. He never tried to flip the story. Distance tested them. There were silences that felt heavier than any fight, nights when success felt a little empty. In 1995, they renewed their vows in South Africa, not for publicity, not for anyone but themselves. It was a recommitment, a moment to say, we choose this again, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. His secret to staying married? It's simple but not easy. Pray more than you argue. Choose patience over pride. In a world that keeps pulling people apart, Pauletta became the anchor that Denzel needed. She's why he didn't drift into the emptiness he always feared. They don't make a show of it, but behind every man who seems unbreakable, there's usually someone who decided to stay, even when walking away would have been easier. Now, there's loss, and how Denzel handles it tells you a lot. In 1991, while he was filming one of his most powerful roles, he got the news that his father had died. He expected grief to hit hard, but it didn't. Not in the way he thought. No tears, no meltdown. Not because he didn't care, but because their relationship had always been distant. His father was all about order, scripture, duty. Present, but never warm. When he passed, Denzel felt something harder to name than grief. A loss without a clear vocabulary. Denzel said later he didn't cry, simply because the depth never really existed. What stung wasn't losing what they had, but realizing what never really happened, the closeness that never formed. He kept working, carrying those unanswered questions. Did my father love me? Did he know who I became? Could things have been different? He softened toward those questions over time. Eventually, he saw that his father's love was shaped by restraint, by a generation that showed affection with responsibility, not words. It was imperfect, but it still laid the foundation for his life. Denzel quietly made a vow he wouldn't repeat that distance. He'd be present, say what his father never did, create a home where silence wasn't the default. That absence became his motivation to give his kids the kind of connection he never had. No big gestures, just steady presence. As Denzel got older, loss stopped feeling like shock. It became a reminder. Whitney Houston's death in 2012 hit him harder than he expected. They became close while filming The Preacher's Wife, drawn together by faith and a shared understanding of how fame can suffocate you. Whitney brought light and laughter, a voice that felt bigger than life. But behind all that, exhaustion and loneliness waited, things most people never even noticed. When she died, Denzel was haunted by this idea. He thought there'd be more time. He spoke about her gently, never sensationalizing her pain. He didn't judge, he grieved. He knew, maybe more than most, that the brightest smiles often hide the deepest fatigue. Years later, Chadwick Boseman's death hit even closer. Chadwick wasn't just another colleague. Denzel quietly helped pay for his Oxford training years before, never making a fuss about it. Chadwick later thanked him publicly, and Denzel looked embarrassed. It was never about recognition. Chadwick's passing in 2020 shook Denzel. The world didn't know that Chadwick battled cancer for years, kept showing up every day with grace, carried the pain in silence. When Denzel learned the truth, he admitted, "I didn't know. I never asked." That regret sat heavy, not dramatic, just quietly painful. It reminded him that even the strongest people might be fighting battles no one knows about. From then on, Denzel leaned harder into kindness. He became more present, less quick to assume anything. Loss didn't make him cold, it made him more thoughtful. Discipline was always Denzel's armor. He counted on his body to back up his will. For decades, it never let him down. Then, in 2013, he had a heart procedure. He talked about it publicly like it was routine, no big deal. But privately, it forced him to slow down in a way he couldn't control. He found himself under machines, listening to the rhythm that had pushed him through years of pressure. That moment changed him, more than any award ever could. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. Strength doesn't last forever. Control is always borrowed. After that, recovery made him move slower, wake earlier, not to train harder, but to pray longer. Morning became a time for gratitude, not conquest. Every day felt earned, not assumed. And you know what? There's something quietly beautiful about seeing a man who spent his whole life outrunning limitation finally learn to just appreciate being here. Sometimes, arrival means more than achievement. By the time Denzel reached 71, the world had its measurements ready. Awards, box office numbers, prestige, an estimated fortune built across decades of consistency and trust. On paper, it looked like total victory. But Denzel never treated wealth as proof of arrival. Having grown up inside instability, he understood something that many people who've never experienced real scarcity simply don't grasp. Comfort can disappear overnight. Money can amplify who you already are, but it cannot stabilize what was never grounded to begin with. So instead of using success to escape his past, he used it to correct it. His homes reflect that choice, not monuments to excess, but spaces designed for quiet and presence and healing, places where mornings are slow, where scripture sits closer than trophies, where family gathers without performance. For a man raised inside emotional distance, home became an act of repair, not reward. And the way he gives, quietly, consistently, without needing a building named after him or a press release announcing his generosity, speaks to a man who genuinely understands that generosity loses its power the moment it starts seeking recognition. Universities, arts programs, churches, scholarships for young performers, often with no announcement, no fanfare, no public gratitude. He believes, and has said so plainly, that when you do good, you shouldn't need the world to applaud you for it. At 71, Denzel Washington no longer stands as a man trying to prove anything to anyone. That chapter closed long ago. What remains is something rarer than fame, and far more difficult to maintain than success: inner alignment. His life was shaped by absence before it was shaped by applause. A fractured home, a father present in structure but distant in warmth, a mother who loved fiercely enough to send him away so he could survive. Those early wounds never disappeared, they matured. They became discipline, restraint, a lifelong refusal to lose himself even when the world offered every possible shortcut. The quiet cost of Denzel Washington's life is not a collapse or a scandal. It is something far less dramatic and far more true. It is the cost of carrying integrity in an industry that rewards compromise, the loneliness of long nights on set while family life continues without you, the ache of missing moments that cannot be rehearsed or replayed, the realization that greatness often demands distance from the very people who give life the most meaning. And yet, unlike so many before him, Denzel learned when to slow down, when to listen, when to choose presence over momentum. He learned that strength doesn't always look like endurance. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like going home early. Sometimes it looks like sitting in silence with someone you love and simply being there. At 71, he walks differently, works differently, prays differently, not because time weakened him, but because time clarified him. His legacy is not only the roles that will live forever on screen, though they will, and they deserve to. It is the quiet example of a man who refused to let success erase his values, who lifted others without needing credit, who chose faith over fear, and family over noise, and meaning over momentum, again and again and again, when nobody was watching. I want to leave you with something he said that has stayed with me. Something that sounds simple until you really let it land. He said, "The first part of your life, you learn. The second part, you earn. The third part, you return." At 71, Denzel Washington is in the returning, and what he is giving back, the example, the honesty, the quiet proof that you can survive this world without losing yourself to it, may be the most valuable thing he has ever offered. The final truth of his journey is this: success is not measured by how high you rise. It is measured by who you refuse to become on the way up. And I want to ask you one last thing before you go. Not about Denzel, about you. Is there something in your own life, some principle, some value, some version of yourself That you have been tempted to compromise for the sake of speed or comfort or belonging? Because his story is not just about a famous man. It is about what it means to remain yourself when the world keeps offering you reasons not to. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss one of these stories. And leave me a comment. I want to know which part of Denzel's story stayed with you the most, because the stories worth telling are the ones that remind us who we actually want to be.